So hello everyone, my name is Aleksander Stos and I'm also a front-end developer here at SwingDev. And today I want to present you my presentation about React and TypeScript and tell you why I think they fell in love. So to give you a bit of background why I'm standing here, it's because for the last 7 months I was building the application using React and TypeScript, and I would like to share my experience with you. So what exactly I was doing for these 7 months? I believe that the numbers in statistics are the best way to show you that. So let the numbers speak for themselves. So that's the screenshot of the GitHub contributor space. And as you can see, I've added almost 90,000 lines of code and deleted half of them. Why? Because here at SwingDev, we mostly work for startups. And as you may know, startups frequently change their ideas, and sometimes we need to change something which leads to hundreds or thousands changes in our code. So the other statistic is about what exactly I've done. So as you can see, in this project was quite big because we have like almost 180 files of plain TypeScript files, which are Redux related files like reducers, stores and files like this, and also some utils files, and it's about 250 views and components files. So that's all for the statistics. Let's move on to see what is the TypeScript. So the TypeScript is a typed superset of JavaScript that compiles to plain JavaScript. So sounds cool, but how does it look in practice? So there is a very basic example of the TypeScript code. As you can see, it's very familiar, very similar to the plain JavaScript code, with the only difference of TypeScript, of typings. As you can see, for example, this full name property, which is string. We also have the other types like number, array of numbers, but also TypeScript provides the functionality to define the schemas for the objects. Like in this person object, it has to have the name property and the age property. It also has the functionality to define the parameters of these functions, like this x and y, which are numbers, and the return time, which is also the number. So now please keep your eyes on the screen, because in this presentation is going to be it has a lot of movies. So that's the first one. It shows how the TypeScript works in practice. So we have in this example pretty much the exact same code as on the previous slide, with the only difference in this last line, which is the usage of our add function. And as you can see, we try to use our function with the incorrect second parameter. And as a result, we can see the error in our console saying that argument of type 4, which was string, is not assignable to the parameter of number. So it is really powerful. Why? Because this is the very basic example, but it works the same also for the much more complex code, like hundreds of lines in a function. So the author of the function can describe what he is prepared for, and the developer knows how to use such functions. And TypeScript is like a guard, so you won't end up with the errors in your application. So what are the benefits of using TypeScript with React? It impacts on our work a lot, but in a good way. I decided to highlight 2 points which are the most significant in my opinion, which are code refactor and code refactor and code understanding. Sorry. So code refactor. What is basically code refactor? Code refactor is the time when we, for example, start writing our application. We have a very simple function. It works for our scope, but later on, when project is getting bigger and bigger, we have to change something in this function. So then we have to refactor our code, which is not always that good, because sometimes we have to change hundreds of lines of code, and it might be troublesome and lead to many errors. But with TypeScript, it's much more easier. Why? Here are some of the examples. So there is a code from our application. It's a Redux related code. In this example, I will change the payload of the Redux action, the set render contact info action, to show you how it works. So basically, I'm going to add the country property. Save that file, and then the compiler will try to compile our files. And as you can see, we see like 2 errors in our console. Why it's better than using the plain JavaScript method? Because we don't have to like follow the normal flow, which would be to search through our code and look for all the usages of such function, try to update it in every place, and hope that we've changed it in every place, right? So with TypeScript, it does it for ourselves, right? So it will highlight these errors in our console and tell us where we should change our code. Another example also with React, all developers who develop applications in React use the schemas for the props which we pass to our objects. The normal flow of doing that, maybe not normal, but the most common, is to use the library provided by React, which is prop types. It is good, but not as good as TypeScript. Why? Because in order to see the errors, so for example, the incorrect usage of our component, we have to run our code in the web browser, and then we will see like the errors in our console. But with TypeScript, again, it's much easier. Why? Here's another example. So we add the other this property, description props to our component. And it also shows us the error where we should update our component in order to not have the errors in our console. So it's really helpful and saves a lot of time. Another example, this error is like the most common error we see as the JavaScript developers. Why? Because it's very easy to forget to, for example, add some parameters to our objects, especially in a bigger application. With TypeScript, we don't care as much about it. To be honest, the last time I saw this error in my project was in the very beginning, so in the last year. Why? Another example. So we also changed the props interface of the file drop component. We make it optional by adding the question mark in our properties props interface. And as you can see, it ended up with the error saying that cannot invoke an object which is possibly undefined. So it does help, and it prevents us from doing such silly mistakes. But this is the very basic example. Imagine like the much bigger component with hundreds lines of code. It also works the same. So it will, for example, highlight the 10 errors, 10 possible errors that you will see that error. Another example, for example, the interface for the object which is used across our application, for example, user object. It works the same. We just change it, and the TypeScript will tell us where we should update our code to fix that problem in advance. More complex example, for example, when we do a data processing, especially in React application, it's very common to, for example, pass the data we get from the server, then use it in our store, and then pass it to our components. TypeScript will highlight all these errors. So the second benefit of using TypeScript is code understanding. It's very useful to use TypeScript because we have like the documentation almost for free. So here's another example. That's the component we used in our application, which is Google Map React. It's a very good component. I recommend you to use that. It has almost 3,000 stars on GitHub. So the normal thing, we scroll down to the Getting Started section. There is an example of the basic usage of subcomponent, but let's say we are curious what are the other possible shapes of the object to bootstrap UL keys. So the normal thing, we scroll down, look for the documentation API for this component. And we see this, which is nice because it tells us that is the object, but it's not enough, right? Because we would like to see all accepted parameters. And in this particular example, there's a spread of the other UL params, and we have no clue how it exactly looks like, what is the shape of this object. So in order to know that, we have to get deeper and deeper and spend more time on it. With TypeScript, it's easier. Why? Because most of the libraries have the typings file, which is basically the map of all the possible parameters. So that's the component we saw. It has the definition of its props, all the available props, all of these descriptions, and there is our object which we were looking for, bootstrap URL keys. And there is a whole scheme, all the accepted parameters we can pass to such component. But that's not all. It also has the definition, the schema for all the object it uses. So, for example, for this center, we have the chords, which is also this, and there is also a definition for this object and every other. So it's really helpful and can save a lot of time, especially for the libraries which doesn't have as good documentation as we want them to have. So another benefit connected to the code understanding is the code maintenance and your teammates. Why code maintenance? Because with TypeScript, it's easier to understand your code because you have all of these definitions, right? So you define your components, define the interfaces for these components. So it's very easy to maintain your code because, as we know, just after 2 weeks, we have no clue what is going on. It's also good for our teammates. Why? Because it's much easier to introduce new people because they won't be afraid of making some changes. It's very easy to start working on a project because all the errors they possibly might make will be highlighted in the error console. So the real case example is that's my face after seeing the results of the git blame command that owned the author of the code after several weeks because it was really crazy, right? So you know more such phase. Another good point of TypeScript is the IDE support. Why? Because it has a pretty wide community, and with that comes the support of all the major text editors, like Visual Studio. Maybe that is not the best example because Visual Studio code is made by Microsoft, but still, it is really good. See the video. You can see as you can see on the video, it provides lots of helpful functions, like just highlighting the errors just in our code. In this example, that the error that text is required, so we have to add it to use this component. But it also gives us the suggestions of other optional components, which is really helpful and speeds up our work. So there is another example from WebStorm. It works the same, and it's really, really helpful. And believe me, in all the other major text editors, it works the same. Another point, which is more like my recommendation, TypeScript. What is TSLint? Sorry, what is TSLint? TSLint just checks our TypeScript code for the readability, maintainability, and functionality errors. And in general, it's like our guard to write the proper TypeScript code. Why it's useful? Let's see this example. It's the proper TypeScript code. It's the code I used at the beginning of the presentation. And as you can see, even if it's TypeScript, it does not provide this functionality to the type checking. Why? Because we can use any parameter in the incorrect places like this, and it does not help us and might even lead to such error like this. So in order to prevent that, I have some recommendations for you how to properly set the TSLint configuration. First of all, I highly recommend you to use TSLint Microsoft Contrib library. Basically, it's the package of all the rules for your TSLint. Why it's so awesome? Because it not only provides you the already made package of rules, but it also has such rules that are very good for your application because it makes it more secure, like in these examples. I encourage you to check out this and see all the rules with their descriptions and why these rules are important. Another example, another recommendation, I recommend you to use the TSLint React, which is basically the package for writing the proper React code to just keep your React code in a good shape. But one disclaimer here, based on my experience, do not hesitate to override some of the rules. Why? Because some of them might be annoying, especially from this Deslean React package, because it's someone's way to write the TypeScript code. So you can override them, but always think twice to make sure it won't lead to any insecure errors, for example. So the very good question, is it hard to learn TypeScript? I would say it depends. It depends on your background. Mostly, why? Because if you have some experience in strict type languages like Java or C#, it will be very easy to switch to writing applications in TypeScript. I would even say you will feel it. You would feel writing applications in TypeScript more familiar than it will be better for you than writing them in the plain JavaScript. But for those who don't have such experience, don't be afraid after seeing such code. Really, that was my first when I for the first time saw code like this, because it looks crazy, but believe me, just after reading through the documentation, a few tutorials, it's fully understandable and it's really, really helpful. So the question is, should you use TypeScript in your React projects? Well, I would say strongly yes. Why? Because as you saw, it has a lot of really cool benefits. It will speed up your work and your friends' work, because you won't spend time on fixing bugs, because you would have much less of them. It would benefit your friends because it would be easier to understand the code. You won't get stressed after making some changes, and you will keep your code in a very good shape. I also encourage you not only to limit yourself to using TypeScript in your JavaScript, in your React application, but also use it in any other project you do mainly in JavaScript, to basically switch to TypeScript, because it really is helpful. A small disclaimer here from me. There is another solution for writing JavaScript code with typings, which is named Flow. Flow is made by Facebook, but basically Flow is not in my type. Why? Because we had it in one of our projects, and it was very, very troublesome to even set it up. And after later on, it was also very bad experience, because it was not doing what it should. So I'm including some of the further worth reading articles, especially this about higher order component, because that's what was one of my problems at the very beginning, but also some of the best practices of how to use TypeScript to help you writing your own React applications. So these are my socials. If you want to ask me any question, ask for advice, feel free to write me a message, or just use our Warsaw microconf hashtag on Twitter and ask whatever you want. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you will also fall in love in TypeScript as much as I did. Thank you very much.